Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning on your Saturday. We're excited that you are here. Please feel free to share in the chat where you're from and what your favorite weekend activity is when you're not enjoying #Literacy Matters. Be at lots of places. Thank you so much, Susan. That's exciting. Yes, spending time with family. Hello, welcome.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Fantastic. We're so excited you are here on this early Saturday morning.
Yes. Let me go ahead and make you a co-host. And also Miss Candela, correct?
Correct. And Miss Ong. It's Dr.
Yes.
Candela and Miss Ong.
Yes. So are we starting already? A little bit early.
We've got so many people so excited to learn about data and identifying change and improving student outcomes that we were early. We were just getting to know where everybody was from and what they would be doing if they weren't here, celebrating Literacy Matters today.
Yes. Now, would you guys like for me to introduce your bio, or would you want to just kind of tell them about you a little bit?
We have it built into our slides, so we're happy to do so that you can sit back and relax and enjoy.
And that's okay. And I'm just saying it just because of the timing. I know it's important for you.
Yes. No, it's perfect.
Okay. So I will be checking on the chat. If anybody has any questions, I will go ahead and unmute myself and just remind you. But yes, we are very excited. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We're very excited to have Ms. Kristen, Candela, and Yvonne on using data to identify change and improve student outcomes. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Do you want us to go ahead and get started now or wait until 10 o'clock?
I think let's just wait 5 more minutes.
You got it. That's perfect. We like to wait as well. And I'm feeling the chat from Miss Meyer here about taking your children to various sport practices. I know that as soon as I hang up here, I'm taking one of mine, running them across town to one event, and I'm already thinking, did I pack all of their equipment in the car?
No, I was reading your bio and I'm like very impressed about the commitment during like after the COVID-19 pandemic, and I just can't wait to hear all about you.
Well, definitely being an educator during the pandemic, and then everyone becoming a virtual educator during and post pandemic, because it definitely changed it's a whole conversation itself, but it changed the way education is looked at by so many parents. It used to be a very small cohort of all virtual. We have a very small virtual school.
Thanks
Part
so
of
much
what
for
I
your
did. It
presentation.
grew so much.
Thank you,
Yes.
everyone, for
Students
being
so many
here.
outlets.
Next
Be able
session
to
begins
embrace
at 10 o'clock.
hybrid and
So
face-to-face
I'm
learning
going
as well as
to
all virtual. So it's
stop
exciting. It's good
recording.
stuff.
Have a great day.
Okay, I will be right back and we'll start in
Got about 2 minutes left. Definitely get those stretches in. You'll hear about how Yvonne and I are middle school math teachers, and I always like to smile because I used to tell everyone we can do virtual yoga, and I used to make it math related. And I know it's a literacy conference, but we talk about how we've got literacy extends into all the content areas. So thinking about making different yoga poses in mathematical graphs, you know, easy stuff, good stuff, getting stretched, getting ready. So that we're going to interact for the next about 50 to 55 minutes. It's going to be great.
What's the craziest mathematical graph you had them react?
Oh, usually it's an incorrect one, but you tell them to do something like a square root and it's backwards, but it's good stuff. It's great with your youngest, with foundational students too, when they're doing letter identification. You could have them try and make, you know, it's the YMCA, but we turned it into yoga too. It definitely transcends all content. So
Love it. I want to see them do like a sign graph.
oh yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. You know, be a little groovy. Be a little groovy.
Okay, we're ready. Thank you for being here. Good morning. And thank you for everybody to being here on a Saturday morning. We really appreciate you.
So welcome everyone. We're going to be talking today about taking a data-driven approach to accelerating learning, promoting equity, and supporting the whole child. And our focus will be around really MTSS practices and how that will support learning for all of our students. And so a little bit about me. I am raised and a product of Texas education. So I grew up in Dallas, graduated from Dallas, went to Austin for college, taught in Dallas, and unfortunately now I live in New York. But I was a secondary math teacher for a number of years. And now I am here as a National Academic Advisor at Renaissance. And then Kristen can introduce herself very briefly and we'll jump right in.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Kristen Candela. I'm also a National Academic Advisor here with Renaissance. I'm excited to be here because 17 years ago, I started in the classroom as a secondary math teacher after realizing being an actuary was not as exciting, and I liked children and supporting young learners. And I moved around. I came from a small district in Florida and moved into different roles where we wear many hats, right? We all have very many hats, and I was the K-12 math coordinator. I honestly say I had the privilege and the gray hair to prove of that I was a virtual school principal before, during, and post the pandemic, when everybody was virtual, and then when we still kept that virtual component. I think you might have heard if you jumped on early about that. And then I ended my career as instructional and materials and technology integration specialist because it was really important to have content and digital technology that really supported what we're trying to do in the classroom, that wasn't too much and not too little, and really just thinking about it being just right. And one of those products was many of our Renaissance products all along the way. And as we think about those components and working with students, I mentioned it earlier as I was speaking about how we may be math teachers, but literacy matters everywhere. And I always was working with reading coaches and reading teachers and language arts teachers to really think about, it is about the whole student. And the first thing I looked at after I looked at math scores was, what are their reading scores? How can I use that data to help inform what I'm doing in the classroom? So I'm really excited. Yvonne's going to kick us off to talk, get us started today to show some of the ways that we use that data to inform and change instruction.
So at Renaissance, our mission is to accelerate learning for all children and adults of all ability levels and ethnic and social backgrounds worldwide, which is why we're so focused and excited about the Literacy Matters conference today. And it's a really important topic nowadays when student needs are constantly evolving. And so recently, this year, the National Assessment of Education Progress released new literacy results. And it shows that almost 40% of fourth graders in public schools scored below basic in reading. And so we know that literacy is crucial right now. It doesn't just matter, it's crucial for our students. But on top of their literacy challenges, we also have challenges in social emotional learning, in behaviors, with attendance, post-pandemic. And so we're talking today about focusing on that whole child and supporting their whole child to improve their literacy as well as just their school success. And so with that whole child support, we're looking at the MTSS framework so that we can focus on all 3 tiers of support in a lot of different data areas, not just their academics, but also their attendance, their school culture and climate, their behaviors, their interventions, as well as all of the more important qualitative notes about our students and what they're going through in the classroom, as well as outside of the classroom. And so to kick us off, we're gonna have a quick chat in the chat box. How are y'all currently using data to identify and change student outcomes in your classroom or in your school?
We'd love for you to put that information in the chat and really share about how you are using that data, because we know there's a lot of data in our schools today. There's a lot of data that's going on with, they say the average instructional classroom has between 85 and 120 different data points that they're collecting each year from various technology programs or print materials or core instruction. And I bet you we all feel that, right? As instructors, as instructional coaches, where does all this data go? So as we think about how we're using that data to identify and change student outcomes, we thought of the 5 top student support challenges that we polled different organizations and different schools around the country. And where were we stuck, right? Well, we start at the beginning. We don't have efficient and valid screening tools. Our data, again, is living in silos. It's everywhere, but it's not where we need it to be. Then taking that student needs to the actual interventions, there's a challenge there, and it's that disparate data component. And then we aren't sure which interventions are more and less effective at the student level, at the classroom level, at the school, and at the district level. And then when we think about overall instruction and intervention programming, if we have any literacy coaches or literacy coordinators on the meeting today, we want to make sure that what we're picking for our students is working. Right? We go through these textbook adoptions yearly. We go through all these components. Let's make sure it's working. And I love that Patrice here mentioned in the chat about that data analysis and using it during the PLCs, the professional learning communities. And we're really going to focus on the power of having that data together to build those reteaching opportunities and collecting those data components as well, but having it together to make sense of it all. But I'm going to kick it off with the power of efficient and valid screening tools. And we'll focus it around the idea of, because we are with Renaissance, about how we have our screening and progress monitoring with STAR assessments. And we'll talk about those actionable insights with EduClimber. But keep in mind, like I mentioned, there are so many programs with data points. It's making sure that you have that valid and accurate and reliable screening data and then having it together as well. So when we think about that, we highlight our STAR assessments. And I know that many of you probably use our STAR assessments. It's big in Texas, right? We love, Renaissance loves Texas to really focus on having and providing those valid and reliable and aligned assessments to start at the beginning to look at all of our students and then diving even deeper into our curriculum-based measures. With our computer adaptive assessments, we believe in let's make it quick, because even though data is one of the most important pieces we can have when we're looking at helping a student learn to read, we also need to make sure that we're providing time in the classroom for teachers to do what they're there to do, is teach. So we do it quickly, we do it easily, and we do it effectively to have that data. And then we love to share it with our curriculum-based measures as well. Those are our 1-minute measures that are really looking at things like passage oral reading through grade 6, letter naming, letter sounds, receptive and expressive nonsense words. All of those components, using those as screening tools so you know where every single student is. Because the act of taking the assessment is only the first part. It's what we do with that data afterwards. So when we think about where that data is, we're immediately looking at having those valid screening tools. We want to look at that global 20,000 foot view. I like to equate it to jumping out of an airplane. And when I'm first looking out, and I'm not scared anymore, right? I look out and I go, okay, I can see the whole state of Texas as I'm jumping out of this airplane. And now I know so which areas are and which students are at or above benchmark. I need to challenge those students. But thinking about that MTSS framework, I know which students are going to need additional interventions and even students who need urgent interventions. And being able to differentiate between what the state says are those urgent interventions and what your district or your school or your classroom priorities are, and being able to pull those reports, that's key to have that valid and reliable screening data, because every school and every district have different needs. And we want to make sure that our data reflects those strategic goals and those strategic needs. But since we're at a literacy conference, we know we want to talk about those individual students as well. And that's where that universal screening data is so powerful with that individual student data. We start with that diagnostic report, which is really going to break down those domains, those skill set scores, right? We think about all of those different assessments that we give to get data, such as what we're seeing on the screen with these individual pieces, whether it's one of our curriculum-based measures. We're putting it all together. And with our youngest learners, it's only taking actually 10 minutes for our early literacy. And we're also providing those recommendations of where students are ready to learn now versus where students might not be ready yet because they're still building those foundational skills. So when we look at that from an early literacy lens, or we look at it from even a higher level, second, third, fourth, all the way through 12th grade, and we get into those domains, those literature domains, poetry, understanding those different components within reading, we can very quickly identify where our students are as a class and as individual students, and where, when we talk about, somebody mentioned those PLCs, where we can provide those reteach opportunities. As reading interventionists, as literacy coaches, as coordinators, we can go in and say, ooh, we might need some more supports in specific areas. We can do it down and align to your Texas standards, or to whatever state you're in. We can align to your state standards. So when you're looking for content aligned to a standard or a skill, it's built in there as well. And I love that Susan just mentioned about those small groups and those students in needs. It's going to help students put into groups as well. And this is one of my favorite parts when we're thinking about students. We put our students in groups. We really personalize their paths. And Renaissance loves to share that it is a lot about achievement. We need to know if our students are achieving well. We also want to make sure they're growing, because regardless of where they're starting, we want them to continue to grow. And so what we're able to do with our student growth percentile metric is we share with you as a part of that universal screener. If they're high achievers, are they still continuing to grow and learn? I love to think about that second grader who comes into elementary school or comes into kindergarten, probably already reading. They're so excited. It's the student we don't worry about. They always score well on all the assessments. But now we're able to say, are we continuing to stretch that student to help them grow so that they're continuing to build that love and foster that love of reading? Are they still growing? And we get very excited about it. And that's where the power of knowing about growth and proficiency really benefits individual students, and knowing if those, for our students who may have started on a different path, our English language learners, our students with disabilities or IEPs or 504s, we're comparing them to their academic peers. So we know that they're growing and they're not proficient yet, but they're growing, and we know what we're doing is working. So that was just a quick overview of the power of having valid and reliable screening tools, so you know where everybody is, but also down to that individual student about where they're ready to learn. But I also like to share, we talk about the whole student. It's about more than just academics, right? And when we think about those valid and reliable screening tools, it extends out. It extends into that the child and where they're working. And as part of our system, we are able to support social emotional behavior with all of our learners. When we think about social emotional behavior screening, having those screeners for all, brief screeners for all of your students K through 12 that are embedded with social, academic, and emotional behavior interventions, and the ability to progress monitor help students along the way outside of just academics. And you heard me mention it called social emotional behavior. And I love to share this way because it's not just one component. We spend a lot of time teaching social emotional learning. We're teaching our students skills, coping skills, specific situational skills. We're rewarding those students for and reinforcing those behaviors through our positive behavioral supports, right? Very commonly they call it PBIS. And when you put them together, that's that combined learning approach that's addressing both social emotional skills and behavior as well. And we're really assessing the things that we talk about very, very many times, that presence of positive skills in the absence of problematic behaviors. Are students able to become self-aware, and do they suffer from non-compliance? So we want to make sure when we're assessing these components and how they're functioning, we want to have that data to help our students. Again, looking at that for those primary goals, because if we can identify early, we can apply those effective interventions. That's true with academics, just as it's true with social emotional behavior. Because if we're identifying early, we're removing those office discipline referrals. And then we're making sure those daily check-in and check-out sheets for years we did in classrooms, we now can progress monitor to see actual growth. And it's done digitally, again, saving teachers, interventionists, time, all of the time. So they can do what they do best, which is teach students. And we do this because we want to assess risk, but we do it from two different lenses. We have two components. We have the teacher rated SABRs, where the teacher can score the student. And then we have the student rating. They rate themselves. And in a perfect world, they use both, and then they collaborate together. But at least in one or the other, depending on age, we have that ability to evaluate all students in the school, meeting those delivery needs as possible, looking at both that social behavior, where we're externalizing our problems, and then emotional behavior of the internalizing of problems. And it's all aligned with the CASTLE framework, thinking about how our reports are aligned, so you don't have to worry if it's an internal alignment. We're taking those big components and those subdomains, and we're putting them together. And it's 19 questions. Teachers are answering 19 questions about students, and it's that 1 to 3 minutes characterized by social, academic, and emotional. And then when students take the assessment, they get 20 questions. They get one extra question, and the question is, they're rating themselves if other people like them. So knowing this information, think about the power of knowing, because I heard once that in order to perform, or boys like to, it was an interesting statement that boys perform well and then and then they're happy. But if girls are happy, then they perform well. So they have to be happy in order to perform well. So imagine if all of our students start in that safe space and they're in a good learning environment, then they're ready to learn. So that's exciting when you think about those components as well. And we do this at the school level. We're going to provide those great valid reports. Again, valid and reliable screening tools. We had that mention of all of those data components at the school level and at the district level. And it's paired to what you are already doing, because you're doing the work in your schools. You're working hard with your students. We're providing that social emotional learning. And now we want to have that reliable screening data to see how we can make those changes. But I talked about a lot of data. I talked about it really fast. So I'm going to hand it over to Yvonne, who's going to tell you about how all of these data points can be in one location and we can capitalize on that.
Yeah, so we already talked about 2 assessments today, but I'm sure all of y'all are using much more than 2. There's still the STAR assessment with 2 A's. There's your attendance, there's your behavior, there's your classroom assessments, your grades, progress monitoring, skills assessment. We have so much data in so many different places. And so in order to be able to make accurate, quick decisions about what our students need and what's the best way to support our students, we need a place to bring all of that data together. And that's when we're looking at EduClimber. So EduClimber is a tool in Renaissance that helps bring together all of that data, and it helps with collaboration and intervention management. So instead of just showing you a slide, let me go into the system itself so you can take a closer look at what EduClimber does. EduClimber shows all of the metrics around a student in a single pane of glass so that I can see their demographic information, I can see their attendance, I can see their behavior. I can see what interventions we've been doing with the student. I can see all of their scores in literacy, in math, in social emotional behavior. And we're not just limited to quantitative data. We can also look at qualitative data around what comments were made, did they meet any early warning system thresholds, and what other tags they've been given. So EduClimber brings together all of that data and makes it easy to understand. So all of these pretty colors that we're seeing on this page isn't just for the sake of visual and pretty aesthetic purposes. There you go. It also helps put context around our scores with benchmarks so that a non-reading teacher can look at their reading scores and understand where the student is. A non-math teacher can look at their math scores and understand how is their math performing. On top of that, we make the system fun. Everything on this page and within EduClimber is drillable because we know that looking at data leads to more questions. The student has a minor behavior incident. What did the student do and when? I can click into it and I can see more insight about my student and understand what's going on with Tanner. The other great thing about this is we have historical data. And so with the historical data, we can see not just how Tanner is doing this school year, but how did he do in the past? As well as how did he do on one assessment over multiple years in time? Is he making progress? And this leads to the growth metrics that Kristen was talking about earlier. We don't want to just see their proficiency this year, but we want to see what growth and progress they've made over time. And the great thing about EduClimber is we can view all of these different components of data on that individual student level. We can view it at that class level. We can view it at a grade level, as well as at the school and district level. So we can view that data, not just for our individual students, but for our groups of students. And now I'm going to turn it back to Kristen for our next challenge. Our next challenge is matching students' needs to intervention. So we know that just because we can see all of our students and their data, we need to be able to take action on it. And so Kristen, you can take that away with how do we identify those interventions for our students?
Absolutely. And I apologize. I was on mute talking away and no one was hearing me. So as we think about matching those student needs to interventions and that challenge, we know that it's a challenge, but within the Renaissance ecosystem and with all of our ecosystems, because as you can see, it's an open resource that we're bringing all of that data in. We're able to provide tools and support from all tiers, from strategic initiatives to state mandates. We are able to identify students, put them in early warning systems, support systems, and pinpoint student needs with our student profiles as well. So as we think about how Renaissance can help, we're taking away the challenge and making it easy to move to that next step. We're providing forms that Yvonne's going to talk to you about and then thresholds and really identify those students in a variety of different ways with interactive data walls and pinpointing those components. But we always like to start at the bottom of that pyramid, right? We want to start with tier 1, providing those instructional supports and those interventions to that 80% of our students, that tier 1 intervention, and then having those supports for tier 2 and tier 3. So when we think about how Renaissance can provide that, we talked earlier about how we have great, valid, reliable screening. And the importance of that was so we know exactly where our students are ready to learn and that we can provide those interventions and those supports and that reteaching that we talked about earlier. So we've identified those skills and those standards. So what Renaissance does is create those curated recommendations of what the student is ready to learn next on that progression, regardless of their grade level. It is at that skill level of how students will find success. We've identified those have to know skills with our focus skills and our trip steps of where students might stumble a little bit when it comes to reading, whether it's point of view or central or main idea, where we need to spend more time. And then we're going to provide those real-time insights and we're going to engage students. So we start with some reporting where we've got those instructional and planning reports where again, here's that skill that students ready to learn. And then because as part of our ecosystem, we're so excited that we have as part of the ecosystem is with Nearpod. And Nearpod's providing those curated lessons aligned to those individual skills, so that when you put your small groups together and they may need remediation in some literacy concepts that might be a little bit below or even above grade level, you know that just right level for your students to have those supports. When you're working with parapros in your classroom as an interventionist and you're looking for great, strong supplemental materials that really reinforce that core instruction, you don't have to go to Google and hope to see what the search results are. We've done that work for you and for your teachers, and we've got those not only great lessons aligned to your state standards and those individual skills. We tell you how to support students with English language learners. We provide that vocabulary component as well, how it's aligned there. And if students need prerequisites, we've done that progression of where those prerequisite skills may need to be mastered. And I love to mention this as well when we think about streamlining that instructional planning at all tiers, but specifically getting that core strong, is that when we think about where those students are ready to learn, we're celebrating it and we're engaging students. You'll commonly hear me refer to this generation, having two children of my own, I call them the TikTok generation. I have 15 to 30 seconds to engage them in the learning before they're thinking about something else, right? It's become so easy for them to be looking at something else or moving the next direction. And that's why that partnership with Nearpod, be able to engage them in virtual reality, having them writing, having them reading, having them along the way, that is key to helping them really reinforce that learning as well. But that's just in tier 1. So Yvonne's going to share with you as we move forward about matching those students' needs with those interventions, those next steps, those tier 2 and those tier 3, and having those intervention plans built in. So when you're having those professional learning communities that we're talking about students and groups of students and interventions, you've not only got the data, but you have all of the meetings and follow-up as well to go with it. So as we think about it, Yvonne's going to take over for us and share how we go to tier 2 and tier 3 with those interventions.
Absolutely. So once we identify the interventions, one common challenge that I hear from a lot of districts is, while we love the flexibility that it gives teachers, every teacher, every school is doing something different with their interventions. And we need insight to know whether or not our interventions are effective and whether or not our resources are working for our students. And so within EduClimber, we can really streamline that intervention management process by creating interventions within EduClimber. And with the EduClimber intervention creation, there's a lot of tools to help us really meet together and understand the effectiveness of those interventions. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. But before we dive super deep into there, I just want to hear from the crowd again. And thanks to all of y'all who have been answering the questions in chat. Our next question for you is, what do you currently do to determine whether or not your interventions are being effective and whether or not they're supporting those students? Take a quick pause, let people type because it takes a while. And then we want to learn your best practices first. Kristen, I'm learning that wait time takes longer once we're virtual.
Yes, it definitely does, right? That wait time, that teacher wait time. So as we're thinking about, as we go through these components, when you see growth students are moved to different groups, that's awesome. I love that. And we're going to talk about growth. Yvonne's going to share some of those ways to really streamline how you know if that growth is happening. And Patrice, it's like I told you to say it, but I didn't. I'm loving your answer. So you utilize that progress monitoring. I love it. It was like a perfect segue there, right? So when we think about how we're going to see if we're effectively implementing interventions and progress monitoring, it's progress monitoring. And so when we're thinking about those universal screeners, we know where everybody is 3-4 times a year, but we also know we need to be able to do those shorter checks, and we need to see those specific components. So when we think about the effectiveness of interventions and if students are on track with their rates of improvement by student, school, grade, intervention, interventionist, and then that scale component, we want to dive even deeper, and we want to be able to see not only at that overall level if they're making growth, which we see with STAR, but also when we get into those curriculum-based measures on those specific skills, those foundational literacy skills, we're able to see, are they making a growth? Are our interventions working? And compare, and also when they're not working, because that's a reality, when those interventions aren't working, the power of being able to make a change before it's too late, not using that data as an autopsy, but really using it to inform as a preventative care model, like Yvonne mentioned at the very beginning of our message today. And again, having that data and having a technology tool to support helping you set goals. So we know that we have to progress monitor, which means there are goals. And helping to set the appropriate goal is a lot of time for teachers. Well, we're able to set those goals right within our Renaissance platform. We're able to set those moderately ambitious, and those ambitious goals, keeping the teacher at the center of instruction and tracking that progress monitoring. So I love to mention the difference between progress monitoring using our STAR computer adaptive assessment as well as our curriculum-based measures. When we think about progress monitoring from our computer adaptive or any computer adaptive, the great thing is that because we know specifically in literacy, those skills build upon each other. It's not just a linear line in one area or another. They do cross paths a little bit. So we know growth in one area has a positive impact in another area. So by using a universal component or a computer adaptive test to have that progress monitoring, I can set that specific intervention. As you see here, Mark's my great example. Mark here has an intervention that we set with that vertical yellow line. We can then, every time we assess, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, every 2 months, we can then track that growth. And even though we're tracking specifically that rate of improvement or that growth metric on a specific skill, we're getting all of those other skills and how it's impacting those skills as well. And unfortunately, in our first intervention that we put forth for Mark, which was small group 3 times a week, it wasn't working. We had a goal, he wasn't meeting it. But look how quickly, within 2 months, I was able to change Mark's intervention, notated with that second yellow line. And now we're celebrating not only is Mark meeting his goal, he's exceeding his goal. And I have that data backing up to know that we made the change just when we needed to make that change, because we can adjust those interventions as they're needed. And you're getting that overall growth metric as well, and that rate of improvement, as well as with our curriculum-based measures, you're getting it on those specific measures as well. So that progress monitoring, specifically using the right tool for the right purpose, all built within the system as well. But then as we think about moving forward into, again, all of those different ways that we progress monitor, and the idea being we don't want students to test more. We want to use the data at hand as we're progress monitoring, thinking about that monitoring through data, those observations, Louisa, that was amazing, and the classwork, bringing it all together to collaborate around data with those workflow tools, and then having those meetings and those action items. Yvonne's going to share with us the last component that brings it all together, using that data to really bring it to that whole child component. Oh, Yvonne, you're on mute. I did the same thing. It's been one of those days.
Oh gosh. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say, I have to talk through this teeny tiny visual on your screen today instead of going into the site, because guess what? We realized that there's no meetings on Saturdays within our system. And so kudos to everyone who is here. But as Kristen mentioned earlier, that progress monitoring data is wonderful, but we also want to be able to collaborate on it and really work together as teams to understand what's working for our students and what's not. So within EduClimber, you can see the progress monitoring and the students' progress in a Teams module where you can have multiple users looking at the same data. But what's better is we're not just looking at their intervention data. We have access to their assessment data, their behavior data, their attendance, to really get a whole idea of, if the student's not showing progress, is it because they're not reading, or is it because they're not going to school? Or is it because they're not staying in their seats and not staying in the classroom? And so we have a holistic view of what's going on with our students in real time to know maybe we need to address their attendance before we can address their literacy. And that way we can take more effective, accurate supports for our students. Then we mentioned it's not limited to just that individual student view. We can collaborate around our individual students, but as a school admin, as an interventionist, as a district admin, I can have a higher level view of all of the interventions and supports that we put in place for our students. And I can see, how is their intervention attendance? Have we successfully exited any of our students from interventions this year? Are our students in interventions showing progress? And what is the breakdown of our students in tier 2 versus tier 3? Do we have an upside down MTSS triangle where we have too many students in tier 3? Or is there something we can do tier 1 to flip that triangle around and make our instruction a little bit more effective so that we're not trying to intervene half of our students?
And Yvonne, Susan had a great question in the chat, or actually there's a statement in the chat about how she is monitoring her what's being done in the movement of students, but she highlighted that she also asks teachers how they feel. So there's that teacher component. I thought this was a great time where we could show them that it's not just academics, really focusing on that whole child. We're able to use EduClimber to have that data that tracks how teachers feel about what's happening.
Exactly. And how teachers feel would be that perfect place where we can actually leave comments under interventions with our students so we can really know. Let me go back to a student profile real quick. If I click into his student profile, I can see any comments that teachers left about, hey, maybe this intervention's not working great for the student because I feel so-and-so. And as an admin, I can get access to that. So I don't have to go and try to bother teachers while they're working about how are you feeling right now? Because right now it could be not great. A student just yelled at me, but it's not reflective of the intervention itself. And then another great thing with our interventions is we know that our work is not limited to just the work within schools. We want to be able to collaborate with families, communicate with the community about what's happening with our students. And so with EduClimber, there's also reports and forms that we can build about all of the work that we're doing around students. The data can be filled in automatically by EduClimber. You just tell the system what data you want to have in this field, so it saves people time. And I can export this translated in the student's home language so that we can involve students and families from all cultures in our conversations about our students' supports. Finally, I mentioned that upside down triangle earlier. We want to know if our tier 1, our overall instruction is working for our students, because we don't want to put all the onus on teachers and their interventions. We want to give them the right resources to be effective at what they're doing. And so within EduClimber, there is an early warning system where we can see by school, by grade level, by ethnicity, and by gender, are there categories that need some more support? Are there categories that's doing really well? Are our instruction and resources equitable for all of our students, or are there some groups of students who might be benefiting more from our curriculum than others? And with this data, we can start taking district and school level wide decisions on our instruction and our curriculum so that we're not trying to intervene 40% or 50% of our students, and give that time back to teachers with high quality resources to do what they do best. And with that, I'll turn it back to Kristen to kind of wrap everything up in a pretty bow.
Absolutely. And we know that there's a lot that goes into supporting students and student support outcomes, especially when we're looking at that whole student and that whole child. And we're going academic and behavioral, and we want to start with great screening tools. And we know we have great data, but we also want to use that data to help drive that next component. And we know with a multi-tier system of support, we can use that data to help put students in a tier 1, a tier 2, or a tier 3 intervention to get them the supports that they need along the way. Because ultimately, the goal is always to empower educators to meet the needs of every single child. And that's a big ask for our teachers in today's classrooms, where we've got 18, 22, 25, I hate to say it, but 30, 35 students in a classroom with 35 different needs, because they all take a different path to school. I always like to think that our students come into our classrooms, whether they're starting with us in kindergarten and have never seen a classroom before, or they're starting with us in kindergarten and they're ready to read chapter books. Everybody takes a different path, but every single student still needs that individualized instruction and that great educational environment. And that's what our teachers do best, is providing that amazing, loving, safe space environment, and then bring in the academics to help them succeed. And if we can use the data to inform our system's effectiveness, our efficiency, and our equity, really using that data to make sure that no student is falling through the cracks, that no students being missed because they're showing off the charts. Let's say they're that high performer, but they're not growing. I always like to mention those students. They're tier 1 now, but when they get to 6th grade, 7th grade, do they remain there? And that so commonly happens in reading and in mathematics as well. When there's a change at home, how does it impact a change in the classroom as well? Because we do know that we may teach our students 6.5 hours a day, but that 24 hours that student experiences have a huge impact on that 6.5 hours. And we ultimately want to support each and every one of you and every leader in your school, in your buildings, in your district, to really use that data to share success stories with your external stakeholders as well, and make those changes and really celebrate what's working, what's, highlighting and having the data to highlight, well, we know it's working. So that amazing 3rd grade teacher gets great test scores every year. We have the data to say why that's doing that. So by starting with those valid and reliable screening tools, putting all of your data together to see how it all works together, having those strong progress monitoring components all built in, and having those strong interventions for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and then tracking it using the power of your professional learning community and the power of technology to ultimately just wrap it up, just like Yvonne said, wrap it up in a perfect bow. We're making it easier for everyone to get back to doing what they're doing. Teachers getting back to teaching, students getting back to what they love to do, which is reading as well. And so we're excited that when you think about the power of using data to inform versus having to find the data, how it makes a change along the way with our students. And we know that there are, I think, 9 or 10 different sessions today that you're going to join, because this is truly, even though we just spent about 40 minutes talking about how all the data in one place makes it amazing. And that's what's so great about Literacy Matters today, is that it's different sessions that put it all together. We're talking about the data, and we use that data to inform. But the next step, that really important step, is that strong foundational literacy in the classroom, what we're using to support that, how we're differentiating that instruction and practice beyond whether it's what we're using in Renaissance or in your classrooms, right? And then having those comprehensive assessment systems for summative and formative and benchmark assessments. It all comes together into one big package throughout the day. So you're going to get a lot of information and how it all works together into a true ecosystem. And we talk about the Renaissance ecosystem, how it starts with assessment. We want to have that engaging instruction and practice and those actionable insights. But more so today, we're really focused on Houston, on Texas, on your district's ecosystem and what it looks like for your students, individual students' ecosystems, as well as everyone within your school or district, and how they're supported using that data along the way. So with that, we're going to save some time for some questions that anyone may have or comments. We can put it in the chat or unmute as needed. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see everyone's faces and their cameras, and we'll be monitoring the chat. And we thank you for your time on this Saturday, and enjoy your day.
And I will be posting the attendance right now. It's right here. And we want to thank you so much for joining this session. It was great information. Thank you so much for all of the input about data and how to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone. And I hope you all get to enjoy this weekend. And if you are a football fan that is rooting for either of those teams, go your team. But also I'm rooting for the halftime show.
Yes. And our next session will be at 11 o'clock. Okay, so don't forget, 11 o'clock. Thank you so much.
Thank
If you
you.
have any questions, just put it on the.
Melinda, that's a great question about EduClimber is newer. I'll let Yvonne share that with you.
Yes, EduClimber is newer. It comes through the Illuminate acquisition. And if you are interested in learning more about EduClimber, it is available on renaissance.com website. So you can learn a little bit more about what it does. And it also has contact information for who you would want to reach out to if you wanted to schedule a meeting targeted directly towards how EduClimber can support your district schools and systems.
Yes, that's one of my favorite parts of EduClimber is it is customized to every single district that it rolls out to meet your strategic goals and needs. So it's one of our most exciting new components as well into our comprehensive assessment and data analytics system. Louisa, that's a great question. We can actually work with, if we'll get your contact information and we will reach out with you. It just depends on how your district sets it up, on how you can have access to additional information. I love your background. I was like, oh, is she raising her hand? I love it. So yeah, we can definitely get you very specific information for that as well.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for attending today. Thank you, Ms. Yvonne and Kristen for being here and all that information, okay? You guys have a great day.
Same to you. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm just gonna print the attendance right here.